morning, and welcome to the June 9th edition of Issues That Matter. And today we're going to be discussing something that has many tentacles that can reach into many different depths of our society. We're going to be talking about inclusive education and how that relates to inclusive lives. And we're very fortunate to have as a guest Dr. Terri Colòn. And when I introduce Dr. Colòn, she will express what her expertise is and her background and so forth. And I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation that's going to have many variable factors involved. So Dr. Colòn, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And your background?
I'm an educator. I've been an educator for the past 28 years. I spent 20 years in the classroom as a classroom teacher, working with all ages from preschool up through 8th grade. And then 8 years ago, I became a community college instructor in New Bern, North Carolina at Craven Community College. And I'm an instructor of early childhood education.
Now, it's from our conversation earlier, you have a link to the state of Maine.
I do. I was born in Maine. And my father worked for General Electric at the time, so we moved around a lot. And I grew up my early years in North Carolina, but then moved back to Maine and have lived in and out of Maine several times. I left the state of Maine 8 years ago to take a job in North Carolina, but Maine is home for me. And
you're involved with the Morrison Foundation?
The Morrison Center. That's okay. The Morrison Center is a center for children with disabilities. They're based out of Scarborough, and I don't work for them or anything, but the foundation that I'm representing today is working in conjunction with the Morrison Center. And the Morrison Center has two places. It has one in Scarborough, but it also has a satellite school in Wells.
Now, the foundation that you're speaking of is the Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation?
It's the Wyatt Frost.
Well, I'm sorry. I told you I'd mess up sooner or later.
That's okay. It's the Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation.
Yes.
And yes, that's what I'm here representing.
What's the background of that foundation?
The Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation was founded in memory of my grandson, Wyatt. Some of you may be aware that last November there was a large automobile accident on the Maine Turnpike that backed up the traffic for several hours. And there were two people that died in that accident. One was my grandson, the other was Mr. Earl Gray. Wyatt was a student at the Morrison Center, and Wyatt was being driven home by his volunteer driver, Mr. Earl Gray, and they were struck from behind by a large box truck with an inattentive driver. And unfortunately, both of them died in that accident. And Earl was 58 and Wyatt was 5 years old. And so we were working in conjunction with the Morrison Center because that's where Wyatt attended. Wyatt had autism. He was considered moderate autism. When he first started there, he was nonverbal. And he went on to be able to communicate with us through the great work that they do there. They're a fantastic center. He went to the Morrison Center in Wells, and the foundation is working with the Morrison Center in Wells because the Morrison Center in Wells is expanding. And they had one preschool class there, or have one preschool class there, and they have an adult program for individuals with disabilities. The adult program is being relocated, and so they're having a new classroom open up. What we would like to do is at the Morrison Center, they right now have just children with disabilities. We want to to be able to provide 5 scholarships for children that are typically developing that don't have disabilities. Maine has some preschool programs that are publicly funded, but they're very new and they're not everywhere. It's not statewide. I don't believe there's any preschool programs in Wells. So we're looking for 5 typically developing children to go into this program that has children with disabilities to form what we call an inclusive classroom, because the research is very clear that children with disabilities and children that are typically developing do very, very well together in that setting.
we talked about the value of inclusiveness on both ends of the spectrum.
Yes.
I think my general sense is people understand the value to the handicapped child, if I can use the term handicapped. They don't have quite the understanding of the value to the others in the class. Can you speak to that?
That's a great point. And we hear that over and over because when we go into communities and we talk about inclusive education is being done right here in Maine, and it's being done very well. However, we don't have a lot of preschool inclusive education. And the other thing that we see is that the community is unaware of inclusive education. And so children who are going into schools who have or in inclusive classrooms are coming home and their parents don't understand what it is. They don't understand, why is my child going to be in the same class as a child who has a disability? Is that going to hold my child back? And what we're finding from the research is that the opposite is true, that both sides benefit, that children with disabilities benefit. They have better scores on math and reading. They have better social skills. They report having more friends. But also the same is true for children that are typically developing, because they do better on test scores as well. And we kind of looked at, why is that so? Why are these children doing better in inclusive settings? And what they're finding is that in inclusive settings, children with disabilities have support that come into the classroom. And so if a child's there, they might have a speech therapist come in, or their special ed teacher come in, or their ed tech taking care of them. And so you have more adults in the classroom. So those adults are seeing children that are typically developing but might be having some problems in some areas who are not identified. Those professionals are seeing those children, and they're catching those children from falling through the cracks. Also, when you have more adults in the classroom, there's just more instruction going on, more ears to hear the instructions. So if Johnny is working with his ed tech on his ABCs, and Susie doesn't know all her ABCs, but she's not identified, then Susie can come over and work with Johnny and the ed tech on the ABCs. And so there's more people teaching in that. The other thing is, think about a time when you learned something from a friend when you were young. And when a friend teaches another friend how to do something, that child will try and try and try until they get it. And so it's different for a child who is learning from a peer than when they're learning from a teacher. And so there's evidence that children will excel, both typically and atypically, because they're teaching each other. And when you teach someone something, you also are strengthening your own skills. So the typically developing child who is helping their friend do something that is the child that has a disability, that typically developing child is strengthening their skill. So it's good for that child as well.
I can relate to that based on some of my life's experiences. Back when I was a child, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago it was, but back when I was a child, I attended a parochial elementary school. And for some reason, the teachers, and in one particular grade, the teacher, whatever a student was having trouble with reading, the teacher would ask the student to come sit with me. And he'll help you with the reading.
Yes. Yeah.
And why I was able to do that, I haven't a clue. I guess I just cottoned to reading.
You just read, and the child who sat next to you is very natural. Here, let me show my friend how to read.
Right.
Just like learning how to play a game or learning how to ride a bike. You know, your friend might have taught you how to ride a bike. Maybe not your mom, or maybe your big brother.
My sister.
Your sister.
My sister, who happened to be born exactly 10 years before I was.
Well,
And
see?
she'd never forgive me for ruining her 10th birthday.
So, and you probably wanted to do that for your sister as well as you wanted to learn how to ride a bike. So peers teaching peers is something that's very natural. It's part of our society. I mean, when you take adults in our community and you look at our community, we're not all the same. We don't all learn the same. We don't all have the same knowledge. And so, I might sit down and talk with someone and say, I don't know how to do that on the computer, and they come along and show me how to do it. So it's modeling what's actually in real life, in our society.
When you think about autism, childhood autism, I can see a whole range of beliefs and understandings. But what are the common misunderstandings relative to childhood autism?
I think one of the misunderstandings is that if a child can't communicate, then they must be mentally challenged. Some people who have autism are extremely intelligent, and then some of them have developmental delays, just like any of us. Some of us are better at book learning than others. The main thing about autism is that it's a communication disorder, and so it's a neurological-based communication disorder. And so just because someone can't communicate in the way that we're used to communicating doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. So I think that's one of the misunderstandings.
I can see that. I can see that. So they from the child's perspective, it must be exceedingly frustrating because they have the intelligence. They just have a very, very difficult time expressing it.
They do, and that's why a lot of them have, especially when they're younger, they have temper tantrums because they want something and they can't communicate. Can you imagine if you were in a foreign country and you're trying to communicate that you want to find the bathroom, and there's urgency. You need to tell them, I need to find the bathroom, and so you might be getting louder and louder and getting more and more frustrated.
One of the faults in human nature, I think, is that when you're having difficulty, if you're talking to somebody who does not speak English, your first attempt to resolve the misunderstanding or to resolve their not understanding what you're saying is for the person speaking to raise their voice.
Yes.
Which is totally nonsense.
It is.
But yet, for some reason, it's a natural instinct.
It is. It is. You're right. And, communicating with a child who has autism is frustrating, although I would say that they receive much more understanding than they can express. So that must be incredibly frustrating for a person to be able to understand something but not be able to tell what they need.
So let's talk about a little bit about the Terri Frost Foundation.
Wyatt Frost.
What?
Think of Wyatt Earp. That's okay.
Find a new host.
Let's not do that.
Wyatt Frost Foundation. Thank you for correcting me.
The Wyatt Frost Foundation was founded obviously after the accident last November, and just out of our great love for Wyatt and wanting to create a legacy for his very short-lived life. And one of the things that his parents, Aaron and Jenna Frost, were concerned about was when he went to public school, would he be accepted? Would his autism be something that would be in the way of him being friends? Who would be his friends? Would he be bullied? And so I started talking to Aaron and Jenna about inclusive education because I teach early childhood education, and that's part of what we teach is the importance of inclusion. And so we decided to form the foundation based on inclusive education, inclusive lives, right at the Morrison Center because he had such a great experience at the Morrison Center. And we know that their teachers are very well educated, very well trained, and they just have great big hearts for children. And we thought it would be a really awesome place to begin this journey. And we hope that it grows. We really want to create an awareness within our community of inclusive education, not from the standpoint of the school system. They're kind of doing what they do, but for people like you and I who are just out there in the community who don't necessarily have a lot of connections with the school system, who don't know how important it is. There's a lot of research out there about inclusive education, about children doing better, like we talked about before. And I think in particular, coming back to autism in particular, the statistics here in Maine, it's really, really significant and important for Mainers to be paying attention to these statistics because Maine has as far as children with autism, it has, for children aged 3 to 5, 11.2% of children with disabilities have autism right here in Maine, and the state average of children of the same age group is 6.9%. Maine has a higher incidence, a higher percentage of children with autism.
Would you know of any contributing factors to that?
Autism is one of those things that they're doing a lot of research on, and there are a lot of speculations, but nothing has been proven. Some people speculate that it's immunizations. Some people speculate that it's genetically modified foods. Some people speculate it's something, in our pesticides. We don't know.
But those things that you just mentioned, one wouldn't think that Maine would not necessarily have a greater exposure to
No.
many of those. If anything, Maine would have a lessened exposure.
Maine's very environmental when compared to other parts of the country, and so you wouldn't think that. So we really don't know why there's a higher percentage. But there is a higher percentage, which means that children who have autism grow into adults with autism. And what is our community going to do if we ourselves are not prepared to deal with that? The taxpayer burden is, we spent like $262 million in Maine on autism last year. What happens is the money goes to education, and then when they, if they're not trained to grow up and be part of the community, then they go into group homes and sheltered workshops. And so the research is really clear. If you start out segregated, you keep segregated. Those people are hidden away in our community. And they're part of our community. They shouldn't be hidden away. Nobody should be hidden away in our community.
And this is where inclusive lives come in.
That's right. And so if we start from a very early age, because remember, part of my research that I do is on the first 2,000 days of life, separate from the foundation. And the brain is firing 3 times faster than any other time in life in early childhood, from birth to about age 4. And so when a child is really young and they're taking in information, they're learning that's what's normal to them. And so I think starting classrooms in preschool being inclusive is more important than starting it later on in life, because they're going to have to unlearn things. So I think just starting and making it very normal from a very early age is important. Those preschool classes will lead to inclusion in the elementary school and then up through high school, and then those lead into jobs in our community. Like when I was in Walmart the other day, and I saw, and I was in Market Basket, and I saw people that had disabilities that were visible disabilities, and they had meaningful jobs. They weren't. They were doing what other people were doing, and so having a life that leads to that and has people in our community that are accepting of that. If Maine has a higher incidence of children with autism, that means they're going to have a higher incidence of adults in our community with autism. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to shelter them away in sheltered workshops and group homes? Or are they going to be part of our community? And if they're part of our community, how do we address that? How do we know how to get along with them?
My immediate response to that would be we need to encourage organizations to be mindful of it, like Market Basket, like Walmart, which I often refer to as a store that people love to hate. But they do great things in the community.
Yes.
But people tend to ignore those great things that they do.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, creating an awareness is one of the things that the Wyatt Frost Memorial Foundation is trying to do. We also are raising money for scholarships, but my end of it is to create an awareness. So I'm speaking at different Rotary clubs and being invited here for this TV show, which is a fantastic opportunity for us to get our idea out there that inclusive education leads to inclusive lives. And that's something that's really, really important, and especially to Mainers. Maine has the highest percentage of children with disabilities in the nation, and that's significant. We don't have the highest number of people with disabilities because our population is low, but by percentage, we have the highest percentage of children with disabilities in the nation. That means there's more children with disabilities that are going to be growing into adults with disabilities as part of your communities, and they need to be included. Part of inclusive education is training the community to be inclusive as well.
Now, what type of happenings are there for the foundation to raise money to do these
We
great
have
things?
a golf tournament coming up on the 16th, I believe it is. It's not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. That's at Dutch Elm in Arundel. And they're still looking for some teams. So I'm not sure when this airs. It may be gone by then. But the big event is the 5K walk run. So that's going to be taking place on June 26th, I think is the date. It's a Saturday, 10:30. It's in Kennebunk at the Kennebunk Elementary School. And so they're still taking.
Where do those monies go?
They're going for the scholarships, the 5 scholarships we're trying to raise. So we're trying to raise $30,000 for 5 scholarships for 5 children to go to the Morrison Center, for 5 typically developing children to go to the Morrison Center to form an inclusive classroom. They don't have an inclusive classroom at their Wells site. They do have it at their Scarborough site, but their Wells site has been filled with children with disabilities. Now that they're opening a new classroom, they have more slots coming open. And so one of the classrooms, they'd like to put 5 children without disabilities into that classroom.
Yeah. It's a challenging topic.
Mm-hmm.
Very challenging topic. The flip side of that is when you have a challenge in front of you, if you attack it and you dwell on it, or you start living it, the tail of benefits is so much greater than the stuff that comes easy. Mm-hmm. So you certainly have a challenge in front of you, but the tail is going to be of positive benefit, not only to you folks, but to society at large. Mm-hmm. And for that society at large, it would help if you played a part in the process and be supportive of that effort. So I would encourage you to do that. Be a part of the effort. Would you have information on the web in regards to these events?
Yes, there's the www.wyattfrostfoundation.org that has information about the 5K on that. So you should be able to just go there and get information about it.
It strikes me, for some reason, Maine tends to be a leader in a lot of various areas. We had a series of shows on suicide prevention. Maine is a leader on a per capita basis, the number of suicides that we have in the state of Maine. We're a leader. It's relative to elderly population. We have the oldest population, or the largest elder population in the country. And there are various other things that Maine is a leader on. It makes me wonder, why?
I wonder too.
What is the common link? Mm-hmm. Similar to diseases such as multiple sclerosis and muscular dystrophy and all these myriad of diseases, my sense is somewhere there's a common link. If we could find that link, we could open up a treasure trove of cures.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
It would be wonderful, but we got to find that link, and finding the link and finding the root of one disease, and I'll use multiple sclerosis as an example,
Yes.
has proven to be exceedingly frustrating, and we still don't have a cure. Because we don't know what causes it, and it's a puzzle.
It is a puzzle. Autism is a puzzle, and so much so that when you see the autism symbols, they're represented by puzzle pieces. the phenomena that you're talking about. It is a puzzle, and what someday something will be found out, and we have to keep working and striving. In the meantime, we have to find a way to live in our society to make it work.
Where do you see the medical community?
In autism,
Yes.
doing research. The Autism Society of Maine is connected with research that they're doing constantly. There's constant research going on. I myself do research, and I'd like to do some research at the Morrison Center with these 5 children just to see what is the perception before and what is the perception afterwards, and what are the gains that the child has made in an inclusive environment. I think that would be exciting. It's a very small sample, but it would be exciting to see that and build on that. So doctors, of course, are always looking at that. They're looking for new information. We just don't know. We don't know what causes it. We know it's on the rise. The statistics show 1 in 68 children now have some form of autism. Now, autism is a spectrum, so it can be very mild or it can be very severe. But 1 in 68, and it's more prevalent in males than it is in females. And so it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. From the year 2000 to the year 2010, autism increased by 119.4%.
Now, do you think that increase was brought about by the numbers of people that have developed it, or do you think that increase has been brought about, at least in part, to the awareness that it exists?
I think it's both. I can't say that 119.4% is exclusively because the condition is expanding, but I think people are being made more aware and more diagnosis is happening, and we're getting further into more rural areas and diagnosing it earlier. However, I don't think 119.4% is all attributed to that.
The rural nature of the state is, again, one of the factors.
Yes.
To throw the percentages out of whack.
But it does. But 119.4%, it has to be, it's on the rise as well. And we've seen that progressively over time. It's just continuously rising. And we don't know why, but it's a scary factor to think of that many people in your community having autism.
I do know that it's widely discussed that vaccinations.
That is widely discussed, and I'm not going to say it is. I'm not going to say it isn't. I think Wyatt's family feels strongly towards the fact that it was a contributor, but there is research out there that shows that it's not connected in any way. Some people say, pharmaceutical companies have a lot of money. You can buy a lot of things with a lot of money. So we just don't know. But the research that's out there right now shows that it's not connected. But I'm not totally convinced.
I would say that I'm a occupant of the same boat. I think it might be, but I'm not convinced.
Well, in the opposite, you have to look at, there are terrible diseases out there, and they prevented people from getting diseases for many, many, many years. So I don't know, it's hard to say, because one side is prevent disease, one side is prevent autism. Which one is it? We don't know. We just know that it is on the rise, and something is wrong, and something needs to be found.
Well, I know there's ongoing research, as you've indicated, and one particular, I'll say, call him a celebrity, Don Imus, Imus in the Morning, and his wife are very, very strong advocates that the
About the immunization?
Vaccine process is a major factor.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not convinced, but I'm not convinced otherwise either.
Yeah.
So as with so many issues, I just wander in the world of the unknown.
Yeah. There's a lot of unknown.
Yes. So what do you look forward to in the future?
I'm looking forward to creating an awareness of inclusive education within our communities so that it is supported, so that when children are growing up through the system of inclusive education, that when they age out and come into our communities, that they're accepted and that people in our communities are aware of what inclusion means, not only in school. It doesn't stop at school. It comes into our society. I'm looking forward to 5 new scholarships of little children coming into the Morrison Center, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the results and the fantastic things going on at the Morrison Center. Immediately, I'm looking forward to a golf tournament and a 5K walk run. It's going to be a family fun day. There's going to be face painting. There's going to be bouncy houses. There's going to be not only the 5K for those who want to run and compete, but there's also the Eastern Trail for people that have baby carriages or wheelchairs that want to go on that. There's going to be a sensory station. There's food. There's raffles. There's all kinds of things going on that day. It's a great family fun day, and we hope people will come out.
How many participants are you expecting?
Right now, I think they have about 150 right now, but they can have more. We're supported very well by the Kennebunk Police Department. They are supporting us by providing safe conditions and officers to direct traffic.
I'm somewhat familiar with the walk, putting on a walk, because every year I'm a volunteer with the MS Walk.
Oh, wow. Yeah, good.
In fact, the MS Walk has had the misfortune of having me as the chair of the walk committee for a number of years. But
It's a lot of work.
It
I've been doing this end of it, the speaking end of it, and the other grandmother and grandparents, Wendy and Pete, they're doing kind of the 5K golf tournament organization of that because we live out of state, and so there's just an amazing amount of work that has to be done.
oh, it is a lot of work, and the pre-work to arrange. Now with the MS Walk, we always have a lot of food, and a lot of effort goes into lining up the donors
Yes.
for the food.
Yep. Very
But
much
it's
so.
always good. Always good stuff.
Yep.
If there was one concept that you would like to be assured that people are going to be taking away from our conversation today, what might that be? What would be your takeaway?
I want people to realize that inclusion is natural. It's part of our society, and it needs to start young. And I would hope that the message getting out would help our society understand that inclusion is not something weird, it's not an experiment, it's actually very much like society. We need to be including children in all areas. The law is clear on it. Inclusion's been around since 1975. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And inclusion leads to inclusive lives. And we're going to have lots of adults, especially in Maine, that have disabilities. Those people with disabilities have just as much to offer our society as other people offer in our society.
And through that process of inclusion, many benefits are received on both sides of the equation.
Absolutely. I want people to understand that inclusion benefits children with disabilities, but it also greatly benefits children without disabilities. It changes their perception so that they grow into adults that are ready to be part of a community that have people with disabilities.
And when I look at it on a larger picture, one of the things that our society is going through these days is we've become very divided. We have a lot of divisions in our
Yes.
society. This is one way of healing those wounds
Yes.
and have society at large be a beneficiary of that healing process.
I think you're right. I think it can help with bullying. When children are brought up with children that are different than them later on and introduced to them later on, what do we do with people that are different? And we're taught by our parents, that we're protected by our parents, thinking they're doing the right thing by protecting us from people that are different than us. And the bottom line is, we all want the same thing. We all want to be productive, independent, happy, healthy citizens. We don't want to be separated and hidden. And I think understanding, creating an awareness in our community that we're all here for a reason. We all have something to contribute. Now, we live in a capitalist society, and so we look at the bottom line. We want our children to grow up, go to college, become tax-paying citizens, own their own home, and et cetera, have a career. And what we fail to realize, we spend a lot of time on that, and what we fail to realize is that everyone has something to contribute, even if it isn't an economic contribution, which they can.
One of my long-held thoughts is that we've spent a lot of time, society has spent a lot of time trying to bang square pegs into round holes. And society would be one of the major beneficiaries if we just try to help those square pegs find the right hole for themselves.
Yeah.
But
Value our differences, celebrate our differences. You know, I think Wyatt was just 5 years old, so obviously he wasn't a taxpayer, but what did he contribute to the classroom? And he was just a joyful little guy. And you could be having a miserable day, and if he saw you frowning, he'd come over and he goes, so happy, so happy. And his gift to society was joy. When I spoke at his funeral, I asked people, and there were so many people, there were probably 400 people at his funeral, and I said, how many of you experienced Wyatt's joy? And it was an ocean of hands raising their hands. Joy is a contribution to society. Can you imagine getting up and going to work and coming home and not having any joy? So, you know, people get up and go to work and they come home and they make their paycheck and they live. But we have to have things in our society that are different than just making money. And all people have something to contribute.
I think that's something that we've lost over the course of time. We've got to get it back.
Yes.
We got to find a way to get it back. And I think this is a wonderful venue to mention something that I mentioned earlier. I am not a fan of one and done. I am a fan of when you have a good guest, and I'm very fortunate in that I've had a good number of them. I don't want that guest to be just on the show once. I want that guest to be a repeat. So I would look forward to the opportunity to have you on the show again in the future. And I would ask you, if you have something going on where you think appearance on the show might be a benefit, however slim it might be, keep us in mind.
Thank you very much.
You have my number, you have my email address. Let me know.
Thank you.
I'd be honored to have you on the show. Thank you very much,
Thank
Doctor.
you so much. It has been a pleasure.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
And I can speak for the people in the room that makes the magic happen. It was their pleasure as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, folks, have yourselves a wonderful day. I think it's a beautiful day out there last time I checked. Enjoy it. And remember, simplify your life. Have a great day. Bye-bye and God bless.